We are live here. Allan Zimmermann is with me. We are ready to install OpenRPA, Node-RED, the ultimate RPA setup here on my computer. Hello and welcome to all you people out there. This is a step-by-step guide. There will be no stupid questions today. I will even ask a lot of them to Allan myself. So let's say hi to our guest. Allan Zimmermann, hello and welcome.
Thank you, Anders, and thank you for having me.
Allan, I wanted to build this killer RPA setup where I will have the ultimate components, which would allow me to run robots for free and as many of them as I wanted. So naturally to say this will be the dream setup, but I was a little bit unsure if I could figure this out. But then you said yes to be my dream teacher.
Sure. Yes.
And Allan, first of all, what are we setting up today?
So first we will be setting up what I call OpenFlow. It is a orchestrator and database, and it's an orchestrator of Node-RED instances and OpenRPA robots. And once we have that up, we can then spin up as many Node-RED instances as we want, and then we will install OpenRPA and connect it to your local OpenFlow installation so that you can also control your robot from OpenFlow and from the Node-RED instances.
And to the people out there, you can follow all the steps in this guide. I just have to say that before this session, Allan and I installed the Docker desktop, and we did that because it required a restart of the computer, so it wouldn't fit in this live stream. So if you want, you should just install the Docker desktop before you're doing the steps here in the video. All the steps from the video, all the links, they're in the description below. You can just follow that. It's also in the live chat out here to the right. So if you want to follow along and click the links, you can just go to this page where I've collected all the links. You should also give Allan a follow. You can find him on LinkedIn here, and you can join his communities. Allan, back to the setup. So you're saying that we will set up OpenFlow first?
Yep.
Cool.
So I'm going to take the mouse.
Yeah.
So if we start by opening a command line and checking if you have Git installed.
Yeah, and Allan, we need to have very slow steps because I'm not that fast. What is Git?
So Git is a command line util for talking to Git repositories. One common used GitHub repository would be GitHub or GitLab and similar things, but there are many providers of Git.
Cool. So
we'll use your links and we will download Git for Windows.
Yeah. This is Allan taking over my mouse, but I will.
So I clicked the 64-bit version, and this will ask a ton of questions, and I have no idea what half of them is. So we'll just accept the default. That works.
I don't hope I'm getting signed up for 10 subscriptions now, Allan.
Oh, you are. Don't worry. You will love it. No.
And I just wanted to say hi to Joselito, Anusha, Jankit, and Björn. They're all joining from different parts of the world. It's nice to have you here. You make these sessions possible, that I can have this teacher and I can share him with you. So very nice of you to join. And now, what are we doing now? We installed the Git and...
yeah, so now we have Git. So I can now create a folder where I want to take a copy of the Docker Compose files. So we agreed that this is where we will put the files.
Yeah,
so I will...
And just to tell the viewers out there, this is a directory that I created for this session. So that's the folder that we will operate in.
Yes. So now we can go to the GitHub repository. Oh, not that one.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah, this one. So this is a GitHub repository with sample Docker Compose files. If you only want to start a single instance with no bells and whistles, you can simply just download the file and you're up and running. But we might be experimenting with a couple of things during this session. So just to be safe, we will clone the entire repository. So I type git clone and I put in the URL.
And can everyone do this, Allan?
Anyone can do this. You don't
Cool.
need to log in. You don't need to set anything up. You just need to have Git installed or a similar application that supports Git like VS Code and so on. So now we have a folder called Docker with the files that was in the GitHub repository. And if we just want to start a normal installation that works only on the local host, I can simply call the executable, the batch file called normal up. And once I do that, it will then spin up a complete installation of OpenFlow based on the images needed for the services for running OpenFlow. That will be MongoDB for the database. It will be RabbitMQ for the message queue. It will be my code, OpenFlow, the API part. And it will be Traefik, which is it's not a firewall, it is a reverse proxy that allows controlling which domain names go to where. So once we have done that, we can now actually go to the browser and type localhost
and Allan, just
OpenRPA.io. Yes.
To be sure, what's the price of all these programs that we will install here?
All of this is free.
Cool. So everything is free, and it will be free in 14 days, in 1 month, and 2 months. So I can continue using this for free, right?
Yes.
Cool.
There is a slight variation to this. So Docker is open source and free, but Docker Desktop is not necessarily free. If you are in a bigger enterprise, you do have to buy a license for Docker Desktop. But in that case, you can then simply run Docker on an Ubuntu machine in the community edition, and then it's still free. But then you don't get all the nice fancy Windows GUIs if that is something you prefer. So it is possible in any situation to run this completely for free if you want to. Yes.
Cool. And hello, Joselito in Cabo Verde, Akash in India, Rutger from Netherlands, I think, NLS. Hello and welcome to you all. And back to you, Allan.
So as you can see, I can now actually access the sign-in page of OpenFlow. We can also go to Docker. And here you can see that once we ran that command, you can see that it created a project called demo. And here are the 4 instances that we talked about. So if you want to see the log for troubleshooting or something like that, you can click inside here and see what's going on. So this is a blank OpenFlow, so there's no users created. So the first user that tries to sign in will be the administrator of this installation. And just to be safe, you cannot use common names like root or admin or stuff like that. So here we could type Anders and some super secret password. And now you have access to...
Yes, not now.
Now. And now you have access to your own local OpenFlow.
And Allan, what is OpenFlow again?
OpenFlow basically is a database with an API on top that has access control lists on all the data. And it's an orchestrator of Node-RED instances and OpenRPA robots.
Cool.
So as the main user of this platform, I want to get started automating. So I can go to the Node-RED tab, and I can click, let's disable that. And I can click Create Node-RED. So this will stall for a little bit in the beginning because it doesn't have the image. There we go. And once it has the image, it will actually start an instance of Node-RED. So if we go back to Docker, you will see that inside here, we now actually have a Node-RED instance. So now there's 5 instances running instead of only 4. And this one is a Node-RED instance. And if I click the Open Node-RED, I can now log into my Node-RED instance by clicking this button. And here's your Node-RED.
And again, what is Node-RED?
So Node-RED is a open source workflow engine based on Node.js. And one of the things that makes it really, really cool and interesting is that it has a high support in the IoT and industry IoT community, so it can talk to pretty much any device that you can think of. But more and more enterprises and other open source projects are creating modules and add-ons for Node-RED for automating their systems as well. So you can think of Node-RED as the much cooler and much more integrated version of Sapphire. Sapphire. What's the name of the common workflow engine? Like if this, else then that. Never mind. But it is a very well connected workflow engine. If I go to the menu and go to the palette and go to install, you can see that I can actually install more than 3,800 modules. And a module could be, I need to pull out, I need to connect to the feed of new leads getting created in Salesforce. Well, then I just install a Salesforce connector. Or if I need to work with SharePoint, I can install a SharePoint connector. Or if I need to use any of the Azure services, I can install an Azure connector and so on. So it's really, really well connected to a lot of different things, especially cloud services, but also a lot of on-premise applications are supported inside here.
Cool. And Bharat says, hello, Allan Zimmermann in the chat. So, Allan, we have a lot of people joining and wanting to watch the amazing products getting installed and learn to work with the basics of it. So thanks again for joining. I'm so excited for this session. I talked to my wife the entire day that I looked so much forward to it. So
I hope I can live up to the hype then. I need to clarify, and this is important. I did not create Node-RED. Node-RED is created by some very talented guys, former API guys, and it is owned and controlled by the Node.js Foundation. So we are just using that as part of our orchestration features. So OpenFlow adds some features to Node-RED that Node-RED doesn't have in the out-of-the-box solution. So the first thing OpenFlow adds is it adds access control. That's relatively simple, but it allows us to have multiple users and control what permissions they have inside Node-RED. The other thing that OpenFlow adds is that when Node-RED is running in our environment, we control the flows and the credentials and the configuration of the Node-RED and save it inside OpenFlow. So if we go to OpenFlow and we go to entities, this allows us to see everything that is inside the database. And inside here, there's a collection called Node-RED. And as you can see, here are the configuration things for your Node-RED. Mm-hmm. If I now change this workflow and deploy some changes to it, you will see that I also now have the flow. So the node that I just added, that JSON representation of that workflow is now inside the database. That means that now we can simply back up. That is super annoying. I can now very easily, I only have to back up my MongoDB database, and I now have full control and of everything. So if something goes wrong, I can just restore the database and I can recreate my entire environment. The last thing that OpenFlow adds to Node-RED, which it doesn't have out of the support, is the ability to easily load balance workload across multiple Node-RED instances. So if you have some workload that either takes a long time, requires a lot of RAM or CPU, you can simply, by doing a few clicks, spin up 5 or 10 Node-RED instances, and then whatever you're sending to Node-RED, we can now load balance that across as many Node-RED instances as we want.
Cool.
So if we go back to Node-RED just really quickly. So inside Node-RED, Node-RED is a workflow engine, which means that we are using a design surface to create workflows that has a start and ending point. And inside here, I have a list of what we call nodes, and nodes add different types of functionality. All nodes will either have an output connector, it will have an input connector so we can connect it to something, and sometimes it will have both. So that would typically be nodes that processes data or fetches data based on the configuration information it's getting from the previous node. So for instance, let's say that I want to see something happening because this workflow is running and is active, but it's not really doing anything. So if I take the inject node, which allows me to insert something into the workflow, I can then with the debug node see the result of what I injected. So this is not running in the browser. I can edit it in browser. I can see it in the browser, but the workflow itself is running on the Node-RED server. Let's call it server, but the part inside Docker, right? Mm-hmm. So if I click this node, I can now see that I had injected something, and I can see the result of that with the debug node. And what I injected is a timestamp. So if I click this, I can actually see what the timestamp is. So it was actually giving us a Unix timestamp, but if I click it, I can see it in a more humanly readable version. I need some questions.
Akash says great to see you both, and Node-RED is a great tool, and Ranka joins from India, a lot of people here. And Allan, so the Node-RED, what is the major advantage of that? Would you say? Why should I use it?
So workflow engines, if they have a graphical user interface, have the benefit of all the hype that we've seen around low code, no code, and all of that. And I don't want to light the fire or whatever you call it about, is that a good thing or bad thing, and does that make citizen developers work and all of that. But generally speaking, by having a higher abstraction layer when we are creating our, let's call it code, but workflows, we can much faster and much easier get things done. You cannot always get things done simply by creating a workflow. So having a low-code solution that allows you to combine code with with the workflow elements, we get a very powerful combination where people without a good coding background can easily get started and make functionality and get things done. They get a visual representation of the most common logical operations that you would do in coding languages. But the more experienced developers easily get access to writing code in the language that they prefer. So for instance, inside Node-RED, the default language that we code in is JavaScript. So if you can develop JavaScript or know a language that is similar to JavaScript, you are very quickly up and going and working inside here. But if you don't know JavaScript, or if you're more comfortable with some other programming language, you can actually install other programming language inside Node-RED and code in that. A common thing would be Python, right? So I can install a Python function node, and I can now write Python code inside my function node instead of JavaScript. There's a node for lots of other languages. So it gives a lot of freedom in how you're doing things and doing things and working with things. The other advantage of using specifically Node-RED is that it is very easy to extend and it's very flexible. And that means a lot of people have created some insane projects for Node-RED that can do things you wouldn't imagine. And you can tap into that community because what most people create in Node-RED is also open source, right? So there's no catch, there's no, you have to pay a small fee for every activity that gets executed, or you have to pay for runtime and how long it's running for, or all these things. A common case that I see with my customers is, besides using Node-RED for orchestrating things inside my environment, they also use it to control things like Puppeteer. So when you are doing a lot of web automation, you get the benefit of quickly deploying and running things. You don't have to maintain server environments for running your Puppeteer service and so on. We can do everything simply by orchestrating it from OpenFlow and quickly scale up and scale out our environments when needed, while keeping it in the security structure that we use inside OpenFlow. If that makes sense. I hope it makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. And to you viewers out there, this is we are about to build my dream RPA setup where we will set up OpenRPA, OpenFlow, Node-RED, and see how powerful it is. And one of you actually have a question for Allan. That is Emil Bambia. He says, I'm sorry if I missed this, but where is the processing happening when I execute a workflow in Node-RED? Who's paying my CPU time?
You are. So as you saw, when I went into we should disable that. When I went into OpenFlow and I clicked create Node-RED, it created an instance of Node-RED in my local Docker installation, or Anders' local Docker installation. And that means that when the workflow is running and using CPU and memory, it is doing it on the machine that is running this Docker installation. So you can run this on your favorite Linux distribution system in AWS or Azure or Google or DigitalOcean or Alibaba Cloud. You can run it in your local hosting center, or you can run it on premise on your local PC or a server you install somewhere. Docker runs on Linux, Mac, and Windows, and you can run it anywhere that you want. This setup also supports Docker Swarm. So if you need to distribute this across multiple physical machines, you just enable Swarm, and we can then easily scale this out using Docker Swarm. If you need something that is more enterprisey, this also supports running inside Kubernetes or OpenShift. So there is actually a sorry, I'm going a little bit off here.
It's okay, Allan.
There's actually a Helm chart that you can use for deploying this inside Kubernetes or OpenShift as well. But that is way beyond the session that we're doing right now.
Yeah, this is a beginner session where we will set everything up, make it work. Allan will tune it so it will run smooth. Allan, we have 2 more questions before we go on with the setup. Ranka Prasad says, can we schedule the bots from Node-RED?
Yes, that is the first thing most people do.
Cool.
There are some things we can do. I don't know if we're going to be touching on that in this session regarding work items. But there is a much more efficient way of handling scheduling things when you get them versus only doing it every hour or every day or whatever. But depending on your needs, you can do that. The most common way we can schedule something is that with the Inject node, we can actually tell it to run at a specific interval. So if we say that we want this to actually send a timestamp every 2 seconds, once I deploy this will actually start sending a message every 2 seconds. And if I had added my robot node, it would then actually run that robot every 2 seconds. Usually that is not what people want. Usually people want something more advanced. And if you go to the palette, you can actually find multiple different modules for scheduling things. My favorite go-to node for that is the cron node, so you can use the cron syntax, but there are many different ways that you can schedule things inside Node-RED.
Cool, thank you for answering, Allan. And one more question before we continue with the setup. Joselito says, Allan, what is the minimum or recommended system server requirements specification for setup?
That is a super good question. And it is very, very hard to answer because it kind of depends on what you are actually doing. But if you go to the OpenFlow page, there is actually a small writing here around what you should consider when you decide how to size your environment. But if this is just for testing, you just want to install it and quickly spin up a Node-RED and add some data and so on, this can run on very, very low-end hardware. I mean, it requires maybe 0.5 gigabyte of RAM and 100 megabytes of disk space. 3-4 gigabyte of disk space. So it can be very lightweight if you want.
Cool, Allan. Thank you. Allan, we will continue with the setup, and then we will... I already got more questions, and people out there, just keep the questions. I'll promise we will take each one of the questions, and Allan will answer those. But we'll continue with the setup and leave the questions for a couple of minutes.
Okay. So I guess the next thing we want to do is get a robot installed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Probably be using your link page instead. So this is the GitHub page for OpenRPA.
Allan, can I promise, I told that we were done with the questions, but this page here, someone just wanted that in the chat, so I'll just copy it out and back to you.
Yep.
Sorry.
That's okay. So down here is a link for where you can download the robot. If you're interested, under releases, you can actually see all the different releases. And if you're feeling adventurous, you can also get the pre-releases with new features and functions and bug fixes that is still being tested. So if I click this, I can now install OpenRPA.
Mm-hmm.
Should we go through the different options here, or does that matter?
This one is okay. We can install it for me or for the entire machine. I'm the only user at this machine, so that will not make a difference, right?
So if you're working in enterprise with lockdown machines, there's a good chance that you are not allowed to install software. So if you can actually run an installer that doesn't require administrative privileges, by selecting this, it will install in your local user folder. If you install this, it will install in program files and make the robot and the PowerShell modules and all the other things available to every user on the machine. Here you can select what extra features that you're interested in. A common thing that people miss is Java, for instance, but it could also be things like SAP, for instance. Let's say that you need to automate SAP. If you don't have SAP installed, it will slow down the environment insanely if you install the SAP modules. So don't install it if you don't have SAP. But if you have SAP and you need to automate SAP, feel free to install it, right? So we can modify the installation here if we need to. And then we just install it.
And wait. And then here we should... not sure if we can see that, but we just needed to say yes. And we have a lot of viewers saying hello from Brazil, hello from UK. Amazing content, guys. Thank you. It's a pleasure streaming these things because you guys out there and women help us so much. So thanks a lot for that.
Cool. So now that we have OpenRPA installed, we can simply go down here and we can run it. And by default, the OpenRPA will connect to my OpenFlow running in the cloud. So if you don't want to run Docker and all of that and don't want to mess with that, you just want to get started really quickly, you can simply, accept the default. So once you install the robot, it will open your local browser and ask you to log in or create an account. This is both a sign in and create account page. But right now, we want to work in our own environment. So I'm going to cancel the login. And I'm going to open...
Do you need the folder?
Yeah, can you move it, please? Thank
you.
So inside your documents, there is now a folder called OpenRPA. And inside here, we have a settings file. And this settings file, we can now modify to use our local OpenFlow instead. So as you remember, the URL we're using is localhost. And because we don't have certificates set up, I'll get back to you how you can add that later if you want to. We are going to remove the S. So WSS is the same as running with certificates and HTTPS, but we don't have that right now. So WS and then the domain name for the installation. You cannot just use localhost or IP address here. It is very important you understand that. Traefik looks at the domain name that you are requesting and redirecting based on that. And the domain name it's using right now is localhost.openrp.io. So that is what you need to put here. So once we have that inside that file, we can then run OpenRPA again.
Mm-hmm.
And now it will actually connect us to our local, as you can already see in the connection dialog. And it will now open a browser on your local browser here.
Yeah, and one thing is that it now opens in the streaming window, so I just need to get it. I just open a new browser here, and I do this, and just so this was the address that it opened like this, and I'll close it over here. Back to you, Allan.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. What happens now is we now have a robot that is connected to our local OpenFlow installation. And as you can see, you're logged in as Anders, which is administrator. You probably don't want to do that in a proper PUC or production environment. But for this demo, I guess that's fine, right? And it creates a default project and a workflow for us to work with so we can get easily started with something.
And a dumb question, I worked with OpenRPA before, but still, what is OpenRPA?
So OpenRPA is a open source RPA tool. And unlike most other tools, it is based on Microsoft Workflow Foundation, which is a workflow-based way of working with code. So by using Microsoft Workflow Foundation to present the UI where you can create workflows and code and add RPA functionality to that, you now get a low code would be the right term, solution for doing RPA. So we can do sequences, flow diagrams, we can do state machines, we can do all of the things that some of us love when creating low-code solutions, but we can also, just like in Node-RED, we can actually also run code if we want to. So with Invoke code, I can write VB or C# or Python or PowerShell and write proper code if that is what I need.
Well, it looks very much like the RPA programs we know. Is that right? And we have this canvas in the middle, we have the actions to the left, which we can drag and drop in, and then we can run it up in the top menu. And so it seems quite intuitive when you have worked in at least one other RPA tool.
Yeah. So quickly, we have a toolbox with different activities we can drag in to our workflow and get different kinds of functionality. And we can extend this toolbox either by installing more of the modules from the installer that you saw before, or we can extend it by simply going to the project and say Open Package Manager, and then you can install NuGet packages that contains activities that is supported inside Microsoft Workflow Foundation. So for instance, no, I won't mention competitors, but that sometimes, yeah.
You're allowed to mention every competitor you want here, and that is what this session is for. We appreciate honesty.
So if someone creates a package with some activities and they don't inherit from vendor-specific DLLs like UiPath, then you can install a module and that will work inside OpenRPA just as it would work inside UiPath or another Monday or Rax or whatever RPA tool out there supports Microsoft Workflow Foundation. But a couple of years ago, this was a very, very popular workflow engine. So a lot of other vendors actually have packages that you can install for doing things that doesn't really seem like RPA functionality, like talking to ServiceNow or SharePoint or stuff like that. But one of the things that is very different from OpenRPA versus other RPA vendors is that OpenRPA doesn't have 6,000 activities. So an activity for talking to ServiceNow, an activity for searching for talking to Jira, an activity for talking to Asia, and so on. And the reason we don't do that is I really want to insensitize that instead of doing API integration in the robot, we do all the API integration inside Node-RED. So we use OpenRPA for RPA, the old definition of RPA, screen scraping, right? So if you want to automate SAP, or if you want to automate Java or a Windows application or a browser or a mainframe or something like that, you use OpenRPA. Whenever you want to do, let's call it proper automation using APIs, I really incentivize that you do that using Node-RED instead of the robot. You can do it in OpenRPA, and you are more than welcome to, but I will not be pushing 6,000 different modules for talking to different systems when we already have a big community creating those kind of things for free as open source.
Cool. And getting back to OpenRPA, if I wanted to build a simple flow that open up a web page and then click the button, say, can you show us how easy it is? Because I know we have a lot of citizen developers just starting the RPA journey out there that wanted to see this RPA tool. So say that I want to open my own homepage and then click a button. How easy would that be?
So there's many open source tools depend on WebDriver. I think it's called WebDriver, right? Selenium. I'm not sure what the right term is, but Selenium/WebDriver. Which is a tool for controlling a browser completely, but that also means, for the most part, it runs in a separate profile, different from the normal browser that you have. A lot of commercial vendors go down the route of creating an extension that you can install in the browser for connecting to and controlling that browser. So OpenRPA does the same. So OpenRPA allows you to install an extension in your browser, and once that extension installed, the robot can now actually see your browser. So as you can see, it now says NM online, which it was offline before. Maybe I should show that first. But that means now it's connected to this browser. So for a small example, let's say that I go to google.com. If I then inside here, I click this icon, it will actually grab the web page that I'm on right now. Actually, it didn't. You have multiple browsers open. Let me just close that. Okay. So if I click down here, it will grab the. Oh, you gotta be kidding me!
I have a lot of browsers open in the other window for the stream and these things. So.
Damn. Maybe that was a bad example then. I
can drag it over here.
Thank you. Maybe we should use Edge instead then. I don't know.
This is.
Did it work now? No. I wonder if it will be grabbing this one either way. Demo, right? But that's how it is, I guess.
Yeah.
Let's just check. Yeah, okay, it is using that browser. Good, so that's fine. So OpenURL will then open the URL that I have over here. And since this is as with most property dialogues inside Microsoft Workflow Foundation, this is an expression editor, which means it supports variables. So we can make this as dynamic as we want. We can even type code into this field. And we can do that in pretty much all fields that you see all over the robot. But in this case, we are just statically saying, please go to google.com, right? Mm-hmm. If I then want to do something inside here, yeah, that's those browsers giving me issues here. Yeah, I could search for OpenRPA. Mm-hmm. And I could decide that I want to click the search button. And if I then press escape to stop recording, you will see that it now recorded what I did. So if I click run, it will now open Google and do a search for OpenRPA.
And I can see you're using the recorder here. Is that something you advise? And second, could we just have dragged these actions in from the toolbox to the left?
Yes, we can completely do this by dragging them in. Personally, I like using the recorder because it just saves so much time, but we could do all of this basically by just typing inside here.
Cool.
So I could open google.com. I could then say I want to get an element from native messaging, which is the protocol for talking to the browsers. And I could then, I need the right. So I could say open selector, and I could go down here and I could start browsing down to where the input field is. Or I could just press select and then select the field, and it will then create a selector that finds that field.
What language is the selector written in?
I don't think there's a language for that. But I know some of my competitors is using XML here, and I'm using JSON. I don't think there's a right or wrong solution. I guess JSON takes up more space and can be harder to read. So maybe that was a bad decision. I don't know, but that's what I chose, and I'm sticking with it.
And that is the XPath selector here that you're using that we can modify if we want it in the JSON.
Yeah, we can change this to whatever we want, right? So usually I think the name is called Q, right?
Yeah.
Isn't it something like that? So if I change it to that, that was definitely wrong.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to see how easy it was to modify.
Yeah, okay, whatever. Yeah, so we can definitely just drag in things here and do it that way. But should we try and connect your robot with OpenFlow?
For sure. And Ganesh says it was so painful to install it previously. Thanks for this video. So I guess that Ganesh has installed OpenRPA, OpenFlow, and Node-RED and connected them. So thanks, Allan.
Okay. So we can see something happening. I'm gonna add a notification dialog here. I don't know if that will show up on this screen. So let's see. So if I just say test and I run it, yes, I get my test dialog down here. So the little blue icon down here, that was the notification, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I can run this as many times as I want, and it shows me test.
Mm-hmm.
But if I go up here and I go to OpenFlow and I go to robot workflows, here is the workflow that we just created, and you can see it was edited 17 seconds ago. I can then decide that I want to run this workflow, so I can select a robot or a role with multiple robots that I want to run this workflow on, and I click the button, and the robot runs the workflow.
Cool.
Normally I start talking about arguments and sending data back and forth, but let's go to the good part, right? So let's go into our Node-RED instance, and let's modify our example here so that when we click the inject button, we are actually sending something to a robot node.
Mm-hmm.
And just to be safe, I'm gonna catch any errors as well. So if I open so when you double click a node, you get a property dialog for that node, right? So when I double click the RPA node, I can then configure the RPA node. And the first thing I need to do is I need to select what robot or role I want to send this to. In this case, I want to send it to Anders. Then I need to select a workflow that I want to run when I'm sending a message to this node. So I'm going to select the workflow that we just created. By default, the robot will only allow one workflow to run at the time. You can change that. You can change anything you want in this environment. But by default, it will only allow you to run one workflow at the time, because usually when you are automating the UI, you cannot control multiple UIs in different workflows at the same time, right? They will be fighting over who has focus and who can control the keyboard and so on. So we only want to allow one workflow to run at a time, usually by default. And if it's the same workflow that we are calling, we can actually tell it to kill it if it's already running and restart it. If it could be multiple workflows running and we know that it's safe to kill, we could also enable this. And if any workflow is running already, it will kill that as well. And usually,
I just interrupt you here. I can see two persons. One asks how they can rewatch this, and one says he or she came too late. And you can just refresh this browser after the session. The session will be there to watch. It's the same address. You can get the entire setup going. And sorry for interrupting you, Allan.
That's okay. But normally you will never need this, and you shouldn't need this. We don't want to kill workflows at random, right? So what normally happens is that if two RPA nodes are trying to run a workflow on a robot, the robot will simply say, go away, I'm busy running something else, and the workflow request will just stay in the background in the message queue. And once the robot is ready to run the next workflow, it will then accept it and run that. So if you are sending more work to a robot that it can handle, it will just queue up and it will then run it in not in sequence, but it will get through the request over time. So this is the default, and this is what I just wanted to explain what those were. So if I deploy that change that I want to run that workflow, now when I click the inject node, I'm running my workflow.
On my local machine.
On your local machine. Yes.
That's cool, Allan. And we have a couple of questions. So Dusan says, while creating OpenFlow with Docker, is there a way to change the domain name from OpenRPA to, let's say, orchestrator?
Yes, that's a good question. So do you have Visual Code installed?
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. Oops, what was the path? Actually, it's just dot. Sorry. Yes, I trust myself. So if you run the normal up, it will actually do a Docker Compose up on the Docker Compose file called Docker Compose Traefik, which is kind of the minimal setup. It contains only the bare minimum you will need to get up and running. And what you will notice is that inside here, there are some labels attached to some of the instances that can be exposed on some port. And here, for instance, you can see this is where the API is, and you can see that all of them are prefixed with localhost.openarp.io. So if you are deploying this in let's say an Ubuntu server in AWS, what you basically do is you open this file, you do a search and replace, and you change this to orchestrator. Was that not what he said?
Yeah.
mydomain.com. You hit replace, and bam, you can now run it on that domain name instead.
Cool.
That's it.
Yeah.
The way there should be a scheme. Where is that? Help. Did I forget to add that?
What are we looking for?
There should be a property here called schema. I forgot to add that. I'll add that to the GitHub repository afterwards. Sorry. But basically, the way that OpenFlow knows what the name of the different Node-RED should be, what domain name to add after it, that is an environment variable you can set in here where you say name dot and then whatever name that you want. You can then override that with Node-RED underscore schema. I'll give an example in the Docker file after this video on how to do that.
Cool.
Yeah.
And that was an answer to Dusan. Thanks a lot for asking. If you have any questions, just post them in the chat. I'll make sure that we will answer everyone here. And Emil says, how long will it stay available? That is this video. This video will stay available forever, or maybe not forever, but as long as my YouTube channel is running, you can find the session and you can see how easy it is to set up OpenRPA with OpenFlow. Yeah, I think we have covered all the questions. Mod says, hello from Dubai. Great work. Thanks a lot. Emil says JSON is right because that's the language that he learned first. Thank you. Allan, we are continuing.
Yeah. What do you want me to show now?
You showed us how we could start robots from Node-RED. Was that right?
Yes.
And
yeah, we can talk about how you can start Node-RED from the robot. Would that make sense?
That would make sense.
This one. And where did the robot go? There.
And why would we say, so now you're saying that we are opening OpenRPA and then we can start Node-RED. But why do we want to do that?
So let's say that you have a assisted robot installed somewhere that reacts on the user opening a specific page in an application, or presses a specific keyboard shortcut, or whatever the case might be. Or maybe you created something that is scheduled using not Node-RED, but something else to run a robot. And once in a while, that robot needs to talk to an API, or it needs to do document processing, or whatever the case might be. Then maybe you want to be able to, from OpenRPA, to actually get something running inside Node-RED and then get the result back and then process that. So the node that you get access to, called workflow in, will actually allow you to expose an endpoint for the robots to call, so that they can get something to run inside Node-RED. So I can call this my Node-RED endpoint, and I want to expose that for robots. And to show that something is happening, I'm going to add a payload, a debug node, so I can see what is happening. And then to change whatever I'm receiving, I'm going to add a function node, and I'm going to say message.payload.text equals hi from Node-RED. What's happening now is that the robot can activate this workflow, and this workflow will update the variable text to the text hi from Node-RED, and it will send that back to the robot. So if I go to the robot, I can now use an activity called Invoke OpenFlow.
Mm-hmm.
And inside here, I can now see the new workflow that I created. And to see that something is happening, let's use show notification. So down here, I want to show the text that I got from Node-RED.
And
so
can I ask you how you made it a variable? You just wrote text and then something happened?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I press Control-K, then it will automatically create a variable of the correct type, depending on the property field that you're in. Here it's a text field, so it automatically created a variable called text of the type string.
Cool.
So as you can see, if it's not there and I press Control-K, it then creates that variable.
Thank you, Allan.
So I can now go inside here and I can say,
Allan, this OpenRPA, it looks very much like the biggest RPA tool in the world. Is that a coincidence?
Well, it's a coincidence that UiPath decided to use the same framework as me. I used Microsoft Workflow Foundation before I knew about UiPath, but I can definitely understand why they did it. I mean, I love that framework. It is so awesome. It's a pity that Microsoft has discontinued supporting and developing that framework. But I guess as long as there's a big community that are using it and need it, there's a big chance that the open source community will take over. Microsoft allowed the open source community to take over the code base and continue supporting and using this. Let's see.
Cool.
No one knows what's going to happen.
But I will say that I use the OpenRPA a bit, and for me as a UiPath developer, it was very easy for me to understand because it was almost the same, and all the expression and these things were .NET based as well. So that was easy for me.
So just to make this complete, so if I go up here and I say hi from robot, so I now have a local variable called text with the text hi from robot. And if I run this workflow, let's clear the debug window. So if I run this workflow now, it should now send the text hi from robot to OpenFlow. OpenFlow should print that text and then send back an updated version where it says hi from Node-RED and show a notification with that. And it did.
It did.
Isn't that just awesome?
Allan, that is really, really awesome. It was very easy to set up. I'm not sure I could have done it myself, so it was nice to have you here as my teacher. Thanks a lot for that. Allan, we have a few other questions.
Sure.
Susan says, how can we access local host from other computer?
You cannot.
Susan, you cannot do that. Thanks for the question. RDBR, he says, kill robot in workflow means we work in another new flow. So that was a statement. Emil says, thank you. It's this video will be a reference for him. A lot of this is new to him and very helpful. And Hurushisek says, Node-RED is orchestrator for OpenRPA. Am I right?
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
Node-RED is orchestrator for OpenRPA. Is he right?
I guess you could say that. Yes. Yeah.
Cool. Nasra said, hello from Turkey. Thank you, Allan and Anders. Thanks a lot for watching, Nasredian. Rosalito says, Allan, if I install Node-RED on OpenRPA in a server, how can I access it from another PC?
I guess that's a common theme now. Where did the visual code go? There we go. This one. So let's get back to this. So I use localhost.openarp.io because it makes it very easy to get up and running on your local PC. But I do understand that if you want to use this internally in the company, or you want to share it with your friends or whatever it might be, you need a different domain name. But I didn't want to have, let's say, a getting started guide that involves you having access to DNS and setting that up or changing host files or anything like that. So to make it easy to get started, I used the localhost.openrp.io, but you can change that. You can put whatever you want inside here and run it with the domain name that makes sense to you. So just to be one, can I take the mouse?
Yeah, I would just post. I just posted a link to the LinkedIn page of Allan Zimmermann and the links for this session. Sorry, Allan.
It's okay. I just want to make that perfectly clear. So if you go to there it is. So this is the page for OpenFlow. And as you can see, here is a quick start for using OpenFlow with Docker. And inside here, I explain here. Down here, I explain what you need to do to set up your own DNS to point to the installation that you are creating so you can run it with the domain name that you want. I also have several YouTube videos showing how you can do this on a random Ubuntu server in Google Cloud, but you can easily modify that to match whatever you want.
Cool, and you can just talk. I'm just finding that fine YouTube channel. This is the one, right?
Yes.
Cool. If you want to follow Allan, you can go to youtube.com/c/Allan Zimmermann or just search for Allan Zimmermann. That will get all his nice OpenRPA videos here.
I could use a lot of follows and views, so
we will we will follow you, Allan, and that's to you out there. You can go to Allan Zimmermann and follow Allan for more great videos. But wait to watch the videos to after this session because we have more, Allan. So now we talked about how we can rename things and how we can access the things from another PCs. Thomas says he suggests that we could use RDP to the server. Would that be a solution?
Yeah, I mean. Yeah. So one of the things that is really, really hard is actually getting Docker to run on Windows. I don't know why, or Windows Server. I don't know why they made that so difficult. But if you are skilled enough to get Docker in Linux container mode to run on a Windows server, yes, you could have both OpenFlow and the robots and everything running on that server, and people could just remote desktop into it. Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Allan, one of the things, just to jump in the topics, one of the things that I like with another, I will not mention the name, RPA tool, is that I can have a queue, I can have items transferred to that queue, and I can grab these items down and process them. Is that possible with your setup?
Yes, it is. I could just make that.
Could we create a simple example where we read an Excel file with just we create a random Excel file on the desktop, read that, add the items to the queue, and then start processing them? For example, like Google searches, or if you can come up with another better example, that's fine with me.
Yeah. If we create a workflow, and let's call that seed data. And inside here, we're going to be reading an Excel file. We can use read CSV or read Excel, but since we have Office installed, it's easier to just use read range, right? And we could create a Excel document. If I read there, OpenRPA test. There we go. So I have an Excel file here, and I could add customer and invoice ID and due date and amount. I don't know if this makes sense. We just need something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this could be any. This could.
Yeah.
This is just demo data. We're just making it up, and we want to read this data and add them to a queue.
Yeah. Let's keep the syntax the same, something like that, right?
Yeah.
So when I use read range, I can define if I want to use header rows. And to make this more readable, we're going to use header rows so I can actually see what each of the different fields are instead of just having a number. I can now save that into a data table. So again, I type DT and press Control K to create the variable. And I can now actually add work items based on that. So I can add the activity called bulk add work item, and I can then give it the data table, and I can select the queue that I want to add these items to. But I don't have a queue, so let's create one. So if I go to work item queues,
and this is in OpenFlow that you make this queue?
Yes. So we could call this our invoice queue, and we can attach it to the project that we already have. So inside here, I don't know if it makes sense talking about now, but I'm going to do it anyway. So the idea is that when you add items to a work item queue, they have the state new and they are waiting to be processed. And when we then start processing them, if something goes wrong, we mark them as failed and retry them. And we can then inside OpenFlow set a specific retry count. So after 3 tries, it will stop retrying and it will go into a failed state. We can also add initial delays both for retries and when adding items to make sure that if we are adding items, it's not instantly trying to start processing these items. We can also define a specific workflow that we want to run when new items are added, and we can define a role or a robot that we want to run that on. So if you have 10 robots and all 10 robots are able to process these items, we can just create a role with those 10 robots and it will automatically distribute the load across those robots.
Cool.
Let's keep it simple for now. So I have an awesome spelling mistake. So if I go to the robot, I can now, oh, did that not up? Oh yeah, that's right. We don't have watches on this. There we go. So here is my invoice queue, and I can now go to seed data and I can now see the invoice queue. Sorry, I forgot to say, I pressed reload. I don't know if this is too technical, but
no, it's not too technical. I'm sure that each one of us, we are huge fans of this session, Allan, so just continue.
So MongoDB, which is the database that we're using, if it's running in replica set mode, which means that there's more than one database server, they support a feature called change streams. And change streams allows OpenFlow to detect every time something changes inside the database, and it can then notify the clients when things relevant for them changes. So if you are running OpenFlow on a replica set as soon as I change something inside OpenFlow, if I update the queue, I add an item, I create a new workflow, whatever it is, instantly all robots and other clients will know about that. But because we are running in this single instance MongoDB version, we can't use change streams. So what happens is the robot every 5 minutes is checking for updates. And if you don't want to wait for that, you can click the reload button and instantly do that. But it's just nice to know that you can get an even more awesome experience using these products if you're using MongoDB in a replica set. That was all I wanted to point out. Anyway, so we have an Excel spreadsheet and we have 2 rows inside it. We now call bulk add work item and we want to add it to this queue. So if I run this workflow now and we go to work items, here are the 2 items that we added. And if I edit it, I can actually see the payload that corresponds to what was inside the Excel file. Mm-hmm. If I then want to have a robot start processing this, I have 2 ways I can go. Should we take the best way or the fastest way first?
The fastest way first.
So I can create a workflow that we call process work item. And inside this, I can now do what we call pop, which means basically I'm taking the first available item of the queue and I select the queue. And then I save that item into a variable that I'm going to call work item. Mm-hmm. This will now return null, or rather it will return nothing if nothing was found. But if something was found, I can now start processing that item. So I'm going to say if work item is, I guess it's not nothing, right? Let's say is not nothing. I can now process that item. So let's say that I'm gonna do a write line. No, let's do a message. That's more visual.
Cool. And Allan, while you do this, Joselito, Emil, and Thomas says, awesome work. All of this is gold. And thanks for the explanation, Allan. This is nice.
Thank you. So let's take name, right? So processing. Whatever name, right? And usually when you're processing something, it takes a little while. So let's add a small delay of, I don't know, seconds, right?
Cool. And then the language that you're writing in here, in this, what language is that?
This is Visual Basic. So we could actually add support for C#. I know UiPath did that, bastards. The problem with doing C# is that you have to do constant recompiling because C# expressions, this is too technical, never mind. I don't have support for doing C# expressions inside the designer. If there's a big demand for it, I will add it, but currently I met maybe 1 person asking for that. And since you can actually do C# in invert code, you still have access to your favorite syntax with a semicolon at the end of every sentence.
Yeah, and to all of us coming from UiPath or working in UiPath, it's very familiar to us, this.
Yeah. So we pop an item from the queue. If we get an item back, we then show a notification and we wait 2 seconds and that's it. This is all this workflow does. Mm-hmm. So if I run this workflow, it now tells me the name of the item that it's processing. And if I go to work items, you will now see that we have 1 that is processing and 1 that is new, which is not really true, right? Because it's not processing, it's done processing. So we need to update the item to also say that we're now done processing it. So update work item. Yeah. I'm so bad at talking while I'm typing. So if I do this now, if I update the item to say that it was successful, mm-hmm. I can now resubmit this for processing. And if I run the workflow 1 more time, with a little luck, it takes the same one. Yes, it did. So as you can see, I have now processed 1 item and it's now successful. So using this technique, we now have an easy way of seeing what is new, what is successful, what is failed, which is processing or stuck in processing, and so on, right? I can also filter on a queue if I only want to see for a specific queue, and so on. I guess we should talk about why this is bad.
Yeah, why is this bad, Allan?
So if something goes wrong, this will now be stuck in processing mode. So we don't really know that it failed. We just know that it's processing, which is a ridiculous thing to know, to status to be in, right? So for us to actually know what is going on, we should handle errors. And the easy way of doing that, we could add a try catch. So try catch basically mean if any error happens inside this, we can catch that error and do something about it. So I could move this workflow into a try catch, and I can then say, if that happens, I'm going to catch the error. Come on. We want to catch any exception. Come on. I can update now and say I want to retry if something goes wrong. And to know what the error was, we can then attach the exception to update. So what happens now is if something goes wrong during the processing of this item, we can catch that error. We can attach it to the work item so we can see the error inside OpenFlow. And we give it the status retry and let OpenFlow decide whether we should retry this item or not. So if I run this again, it will run successfully, and there we go. It will run successfully, and we now have 2 successful work items. So if we go back and we seed a little bit more data, and we go into processing, and we throw an error. So if I go inside here and I throw a new exception. Hi, Mom. So just to make sure, so now we have 2 new items inside the work item queue, and if I run this now, I will it will have failed once, so we can see that the retry count on this item is 1, and if I edit the item, I can actually see that this failed with the error message, "Hi, Mom." And I can now try and, I now have that history of that. Does this make sense?
That makes very much very much sense, Allan. Go ahead.
So there's 2 things we would normally do now. One is that we would set the robot up to keep popping items off the queue and processing them. And the other thing we would do is we would tell the queue to actually notify the robot when new items were added, so it starts popping items off the queue. Should we do that now?
Yeah, we can do it.
Or is it too much?
No, it's not too much. It's very interesting, Allan. I love it.
Okay.
And I'm sure that, what do you think, you viewers out there? Do you want to see this? I'm sure that no one says no. So far, it's good. Allan, we just have 2 questions before you do this. Emil says, I would love to see it, and I'm super curious about your explanation why you don't use it. So I guess I'm your second person asking for it. That was C#. And Gaetano says, can I add work items to a work item queue from Node-RED?
Yes. Oh, thank God you asked that question.
So Gaetano, you just made Allan very happy.
Yeah, you just made my day. I love it. So I can actually, from Node-RED, there is a node called add work item. Mm-hmm. And inside that, I can create a configuration that defines the work item I want to work with. So I go back here, I go to queues, and I copy the name. I add that as the work item. Yeah, this is not super user-friendly. I'll add a drop-down later or something. But right now, this is how it works. So you put the name in the top field of the queue you want to work with. So this is now the queue that this node is working with. And basically anything that we have from inside the robot regarding adding files and setting priority and next run and all of that, all those things are also accessible inside Node-RED. So if I add a simple payload here, so I'm going to say, instead of sending a timestamp, I'm going to send some JSON. And the JSON is going to be, I don't know, find me, blah, blah. Do that correct? I don't think so. No, I think it's correct. So if I do this now and I click submit and I go back to the work item queue, you will see that there's now a new work item added 3 seconds ago. And if I edit it, I can see my payload or find me blah, blah.
That's cool. That was an answer to Gaetano that if we could do this for in Node-RED, and he says thank you for answering, Allan.
Well, I guess the other thing is that we can also pop items from Node-RED. So I can go inside here and I can say I want to pop an item of this queue, and it will then add the work item to the payload. It will also automatically download any files associated with that work item. I don't know if we have time to touch on files, but either way, so here I'm popping an item. I could then add a small delay of, let's say, 2 seconds to keep it consistent, and I can then update the work item and set it as successful.
And all these exercises, those are things that we can do ourselves because we have the setup guide now, and we can easily recreate these things and make it more advanced as well.
Yeah. So if I click this item, it will now pop an item of the work item queue, and it will then update it. And that means if I go to the work item queue, you can see that I have 2 new. And if I run this again, I now only have 1 new, and I can do it one more time, and now my queue is empty. So you should never do this. You should never have a robot and a Node-RED popping off the same queue. That's not what you do. But it gives you an awesome feature where you can either use a robot or Node-RED for creating the initial work items. And then when you need to send it for processing, either inside Node-RED or inside a robot, you then push the work item from one queue to the next queue. So let's say you have a robot that is monitoring a file share somewhere for CSV files, and once it gets them, it processes them, adds a work item. Then Node-RED pops those work items off, and it fetches some data from different systems and enriches the data, and it then pushes the items to a different work item queue that then sends this to some back-end robots processing these items. And like that, you can create chains where the work items keeps going from queue to queue and then gets processed either by a robot or a Node-RED instance, or multiple robots or multiple Node-RED instances.
That's cool, Allan. And to you viewers out there, thanks for joining. If you want to support Allan, there's a lot of ways to do it, but one of them is you can go follow him on his LinkedIn. That way you will get all his news about this amazing open source product. So I posted a link in the chat. You can find Allan there. Thanks again, Allan. Allan, we have a few more questions. Dusan says, can we have more of these live sessions once, twice a month? I'm sure Allan is very busy, but I will try to make another session with Allan in a month or something if Allan is available. Thank you. And Navia Chakra, hello Navia, says, can we do REST API testing automation plus data-driven with OpenRPA?
That's an evil question. So I don't have a REST in-work REST service activity inside the robot. You can install REST Sharper or whatever favorite tool that you want. You can call the .NET client directly from in-work code. You can use PowerShell and use in-work REST service. You can write a Python script that do whatever you want inside the robot. And I'm not sure what implies in the test part of that, but if it's for timing or catching errors or something, yeah, you could probably do it. I mean, it's not made specifically for doing testing, but it could be used for it, but I'm not sure it's viable for that. But if there's a big demand, I'm definitely open for feedback on how I can improve it for being better to use in testing scenarios. But if it is about calling a REST service, I would much rather do that from inside Node-RED. should we do a quick explanation of how that works? So there is a node inside Node-RED by default called HTTP request, and this will allow us to call any REST service that we want. So using this, I could, for instance, quickly call. Oh, why did that happen? Sorry. There is a service called. Can you think of a good service we can test?
No, I want to have a curiosity, probably some weather or.
Service list. Yeah, I know this one. So, for instance, if I do a get to this URL, I will get some JSON back with a joke about Chuck Norris, right? So if I add, so here I can do get, post, put, delete, whatever I want. I can also install nodes for talking to SOAP if you have a really old system. There is also a node for consuming Swagger definitions. So you can either directly give it a Swagger API or a link to a Swagger definition, and you can now use those functions directly, or you can create a small build process where you consume that and auto-generate new nodes inside Node-RED based on that Swagger definition. We can also expose the REST service directly from Node-RED, and we can also expose a Swagger definition of those by simply adding the Swagger API module to Node-RED. It is super powerful. But back to the example, right? So we want to call this REST service. So down here, I'm going to say that the thing that I get back is JSON and not just text. And now I can show that result inside the debug node. And bam, here is the result of that. And I guess thing that we're interested in is payload.value. So we just get the joke like that. And here is our service for calling a REST service. I know that was not quite the question, but I hope that gave an efficient answer.
Yeah, it did. Dusan says, and thanks for that, Dusan says, can we know when our memory is full of queue items or other logs, and then delete the old ones if it's needed, but not one by one?
So work items is not stored in memory, so I'm not quite sure how that was related. All work items, any data inside this system is stored inside MongoDB. And MongoDB scales to, I think the limit in MongoDB Atlas is 256 terabytes per shard, and we can then add 256 shards. So I don't think you're going to be running out of disk space anytime soon. But of course, it requires infrastructure and certain amounts of memory, depending on the amount of data that you have and the indexes you have and so on. So yeah, if you want to keep your footprint of data down, you might want to delete work items. Right now, the thing you have inside work queues is that if you click this button, it will purge the queue of all completed and failed items. I guess it would make sense to add different options here to delete things that is more than X amount of days old or whatever. I don't have that right now. If there's a need, please let me know, and I will try and customize it so it matches that. But that's what we have right now. So if you want specific things, you can delete them inside here, or you can use Node-RED or the robot or the web interface to simply go in and delete the work items from the collection called work items, because like I said, everything is in the database. So work items, of course, is in a collection called work items.
Cool.
Regarding the database, maybe it's worth mentioning that the powerful thing about this is that everything that is stored inside the database have an access control list attached to it. So we can control what roles or users can do what on that specific item. So this is where we control if you can run a specific report, if you're allowed to edit or run a specific workflow. This is where we define if you can add new items to a work item queue, if you can consume a specific AMQP queue, and so on. Everything is controlled with permissions on the object inside the database.
Thanks, Allan. It seems like an amazing setup here. Allan, MD Hadyat says, hello, Allan and Anders, a bit late to the session. Don't worry, you can just refresh this session. It will be there forever, so you can watch the entire setup performed by Allan and all these nice answers and builds. You can watch them afterward. Emil says, a big question maybe. I'm used to working with software, and I can't help but wonder, what is the good way to work with version control, like creating Git-like branches and pull, push, and merge, etc.?
Good question. Inside OpenRPA, I'm going to assume it's OpenRPA we're talking about right now. I have a project and I have some workflows inside here. And a common thing you will see by some types of developers is that they export these, or they find them on the disk, and they create a GitHub repository and they add them there to have version control and know what happened. With OpenFlow, you don't need that. So if I go to OpenFlow, I go to entities, I go to OpenRPA, and I find my workflow here, for instance, seed data. If I click this button, I can see the history of that object. So I can see what users at what time had changed something on this. I can even see the changes that was made over time.
Wow.
And I can restore it to what version I want, or I can download it as a copy of that item at that specific point in time.
Is this done automatically?
You already have version control on everything inside the database.
Wow, that's a nice answer. Allan, is this done automatically? Do we have to do
this
something?
This is automatic. Yes.
Allan, that is so cool. I didn't know about that, so thanks a lot. Emil, I hope that was the right answer to you, or an answer you could use. Allan, this is very, very cool. So the setup is done. I can start creating my robots with OpenRPA. I can control them from OpenFlow. You can combine it with Node-RED. And how many robots can I run at the same time? Is it
I'm not sure how to answer that. So if the question is how many robots can you run on your machine, you can only run 2. And when I say 2, it's based on that if you go to settings and you go and check this mark, and you need to restart your computer, so we'll not do it now. But if you check this mark, it will enable a feature in your Windows called child sessions. This is what UiPath called picture-in-picture. And this will allow you to run one instance of the robot in your main desktop, and it will allow you to start a remote desktop session to a virtual copy of your desktop, and you can run a robot inside there. That's it. If the question were, can you run more than one OpenRPA robot towards this OpenFlow? Yes, there is no hard-coded limit. I guess at some point you start running out of resources. But once you start running out of resources, the beauty about this platform is that every single part of this system is scalable. You can scale it out. So for instance, if we go back to the Docker file, you will see that right now, when we start OpenFlow, we are creating one replica of the API. So if one API can't handle all the clients that you are running, you just change this number to 3, and you go inside here and you type up. And if we then go to Docker, you will see that what did just happen? What happened? Invalid syntax. Have I changed something else inside here? Must have. Help! What did I change?
Did we change something? We only changed the local host a little bit earlier, didn't we?
It could also be that it doesn't like these OneDrive folders. I don't know. I know OpenRPA doesn't like it. Try. So I just called normal down, and the reason I called normal down is that it deletes everything from inside Docker except the data. So this is the cool part. If anything goes wrong, just take it down, delete it, and start it up again. And all the data will be saved on the volume on the local disk. So now if I go back in, I don't know what happened, but either way, as you can see, I now have 3 API nodes. So now I could have, I don't, I hate demos. You can now have X amount of clients connected to each of these APIs. So Traefik will automatically load balance the traffic between those API nodes, and thereby I'm now scaling it out. And we can do the same thing with Traefik. We could do the same thing with RabbitMQ. We can do this with all of these things. We can scale it out. And as we already talked about, we can run this in Docker Swarm or Kubernetes or OpenShift, so we can scale out across multiple physical machines as well. So to answer the question, how many robots can you run? I really don't know. The biggest I've seen is around 800 clients connected at the same time, and it was bored. It wasn't really doing anything. The biggest issue is that each client can create connections to the database, but I then changed the code so that is no longer an issue, and now it should scale even bigger based on that.
Cool, Allan. Allan, thanks a lot for joining us and setting up this entire suite of products so we can do it ourselves. Allan, maybe we can talk in like a month, and if you have time just for a smaller session, then it would be really nice to have you on again on the stream.
Yeah, one last thing. I don't know. We talked about why. We talked about that this was not really a good way of doing it. Should we quickly create that, or should we stop now?
Yes, please. Yes, please. Let's have the best practice solution to this problem.
Okay, so what you would normally do, and this is going to look so familiar for people that come from UiPath. I'm going to create a flowchart. This could be a state machine as well. There's no need for that hassle right now. But yeah, we could do that as well. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a workflow that starts by popping an item off the queue. So we are now getting an item off the queue, and we can now create a decision. Come on, flow. We can now create a flow decision where we look at whether we actually received an item. And if we received an item, we can do something based on that. So we're going to say, yes, we received something. Come on. There we go. I don't know how we get these to look pretty. What's that error?
That's a condition in the decision.
Yeah. And inside here, we need a condition, which is if work item is not nothing. So if the decision, so here we say, if we actually got an item, run this sequence. And inside this sequence, we are gonna do what we did in the other robot, where we're gonna say, we don't need the if. There we go. Inside here, I'm gonna say,
sorry.
I'm going to call the other workflow, the processing workflow that we have. So the workflow that processes the actual item, we have that as separate workflow. So inside this main workflow, we call a processing workflow for the work item. And we need to give it that. So I'm going to go to the processing workflow. And inside here, I'm going to say, I'm not going to pop. There we go. And we're not going to update. So we're just going to process the actual item, and we're not going to throw an error. Let's remove that as well. This is going to be so clean now. So we could map the individual variables. That would give it more, let's call it type safe, right? We could say, I need these specific variables. We could look at the payload. We could map the different arguments. But an easier way to handle this is that we can simply create an argument called work item and give it the type that matches that. So now I have an in argument of the type, actually in out. So now I have an argument of with the work item, and I can now process that work item. And if I update the payload or whatever, that is now seen inside the main workflow. So if I go back here, and let's call this our main workflow. So inside here, when I call that workflow, I can now say I want to map the work item as an argument when calling the processing workflow. And if that goes well, we mark the workflow as successful. But if something went wrong, we catches that as an exception, and we do something about it and send it for retry. And now we can do this. We simply go up here and say, please redo that again and again and again, and it will just keep popping item off until there's no one left. So if I go back and where was it there? Seed. So if I add a couple of items now, so if we go to work items, reload, we now have 4 items inside here. If I then call the processing workflow, oh, there was an error. What was that? Of course, I need to delete the variable. So now it will process each of those items one at a time with the 2-second delay. And once it's done, we have all the items processed inside here, right?
Yeah, and it will stop.
But I still had to run that workflow. So to complete this, sorry, I promise I'll shut up after that. So once this is done, I can now, either inside OpenFlow or inside the robot, it doesn't really matter. So if I double click the invoice queue, it goes directly to the queue. And inside here, I can say, I want to run on the robot called Anders. I wanted to run the workflow called main. Where's main? There, main. And once I do that, it should update it inside here. Let me just check. It did. Perfect. So now if I go back to seed and run that a couple of times, you will see that now it starts processing the items automatically. I didn't have to trigger it to start running it. It does that automatically.
Allan, that is very awesome. That was a really nice feature. When did you add this?
I added it in 1.4, so that's about 3 weeks ago.
Oh, that's so cool, Allan. Allan, there's a lot of nice messages to you in the chat. People love what you showed us here, so thank you. You can read them afterward. Thanks for all of you out there watching the session. You made it possible for us to do it, and thanks for all the support and love in the chat. Allan, I hope I see you soon.
Thank you for letting me lend your computer, and thank you for having me.
I'll definitely work in OpenRPA and OpenFlow in the future, in the coming weeks. So see you.
Bye.
Bye bye. Mange tak, Allan. Så